Hi, I'm Melanie McFarland, and welcome to this edition of Salon Talks. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Melissa Rauch. You may know her from The Big Bang Theory, but now she's in a new sitcom, NBC's revival of Night Court. And in it, she plays Abby Stone, Judge Abby Stone, I should say. And Abby is the daughter of Harry Anderson's beloved Harry Stone, who you may remember from the original Night Court. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
So let's talk about Night Court. First of all, the premiere was very well received by the audience. You seem to get you got some great ratings, didn't you?
I did. I can't get over it. I sort of in this business, I feel like I've set myself up after some years of rejection to just expect the worst and hope for the best. So we were just all very, very pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is that you came from Big Bang Theory, which was, the number one show for a number one comedy, number one show for a really long time. And to follow that up with a strong premiere on a comedy, another comedy is pretty rare, isn't it?
You know what? I think it is. And I think, there's what makes me happy is that there seems to be an appetite for the multi-camera sitcom. I think there's such a comfort to it, and I'm so happy that I love it, and I'm such a fan of an old school sitcom, and to see that there's an appetite for that just makes me so incredibly happy.
So Big Bang was famously filmed in front of a live studio audience. I mean, that was one of those studios that whenever you were there, you could feel the energy even coming from the crowd and then going, back and forth during production, right? During a taping. Was that important for you for Night Court to make sure that there was a live studio audience during each production?
Absolutely. I didn't know if we were going to be able to have it because we started developing it during COVID times, during the lockdown. So when we were talking about it, everything was very theoretical. Like if we get to do this, that would be our hope. And that was something that was very exciting to all of us involved with John Larroquette and Dan Rubin, our executive producer, and Winston Rauch, my husband, who's also an executive producer. Like you were saying, that energy from the audience is so important, and it really informs so much of the rhythm of comedy when you're doing a multi-camera sitcom. And of course, doing this continuation of Night Court, the OG, that was very built into the DNA of the show, is this live studio audience. So I really feel like you can't do Night Court without that live audience aspect. It's doing a multicam. It's very much like doing a play every week, and having an audience when you do theater is so important. And when we did the pilot, we had sort of a very half an audience because it was still in the height of the pandemic. So everyone was socially distanced and masked up, and we didn't even have risers. Everyone was sort of like on the ground floor. In many ways, it sort of felt like a hospital waiting room. But then by the time we got to series, we had the full stands, and it was just really wonderful to have that experience and that connection with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that you had mentioned as we were starting to talk is that there's a kind of an aura of comfort about this revival, this continuation, I should say, of Night Court, because that's one of the things that you pointed out is this isn't the previous format with all new characters. This is continuation of the story, mainly through John Larroquette's Dan, but also through Abby. And I think we're seeing a few of these sitcoms that people loved from 20, 30, even 40 years ago coming back. You have Frasier coming back, and that has the original characters, but also some extensions in terms of like Niles and Daphne's son. And then you have that 90s show is back now. What do you think it is about these what do you think it is about the audience kind of wanting to see this continuation of these characters that they may have grown up with, or just may have been from like, a different part of their lives? What do you think it is about these revivals that has such appeal?
I think there's a few different things. I mean, I know personally, as a fan of the original, even if I had nothing to do with this, I would be so interested to see where this character of Dan Fielding ended up all these years later. So I think there's just an interest in the same way that you sometimes will look on Facebook and be like, what happened to that person that I knew at the time? What are they doing now? I think there's just that genuine curiosity to see this beloved character that you spent a lot of time with and see what they're up to now. I think that whenever we watch a show with anyone, with any member of our family. Like I know I watched Night Court with my grandmother, who's no longer with us. And then when you get to revisit something like that, it feels like you're laughing with that person again. And I think, oh, she would have loved this. Or I've heard from people who've tuned into this one. By the way, I know when I say tuned in, I really date myself. That I'm very much.
I say it too.
I say tune in, yeah. So I know that when I've spoken to people who've watched this, they'll say, I used to watch this with my father and my mother, who's no longer here, and I think it's a nice connection to a time in your life that you had, where you were creating memories with someone who may no longer be here. And I think that just having a place where there are guaranteed laughs that you could come to every week. And I think that's really going back to the very first sitcoms. That's why they're invented first and foremost to make you laugh. And I also think there was something really special about the original Night Court and something that you really get to do in multicams, which I think is really special. But Night Court specifically is you have this heightened comedy. You have almost these vaudevillian, even at sometimes absurdist moments. And then you get to just sandwich in these moments of heart. And I really think that the best comedy comes from being able to make someone feel something alongside that laughter. And that's what I'm hoping we're able to do with this.
Now, Night Court is a very fundamental way a workplace comedy, right? I mean, the focus is on, Abby and Dan and everyone who's around them. At the same time, I have to ask this question, right now, and particularly in the past couple of years, there have been a lot of kind of cultural interrogations of like how justice is portrayed in, primetime television. And particularly that has to do with, policing. So you talk about Law and Order. I think courtroom dramas are a little bit different. But the reason I wanted to just bring this up is that as we are seeing Night Court, this version of it, was there any discussion about what types of cases would come in front of Abby and, which ones you say like, oh, we're really going to avoid that?
Yeah, I think there's conversations that really date back to the very beginning of the development process. And what we wanted to do with the show is really create a place where people could come to laugh. And these cases, there's if you look at some of the cases from the original, I mean, there's ventriloquist dummies who are on trial. The cases are it's nocturnal, the nocturnal judicial system. So the cases that are coming in are all pretty much left to center. And first and foremost, the cases are there to make everyone laugh. And what Judge Abby Stone, the character I play, does is she's going to treat every case as if we are there on the Supreme Court. Everyone who's coming through that door, no matter if they are a horse or a vampire or a whiff wolf, a female werewolf, those people are going to be treated with the utmost respect. So that's really the priority, is making sure that these cases are fun and everyone's having a good time. There is an episode coming up where we do delve in a little bit to the judicial system. I'm looking forward to everyone checking that out. And we do lean into that a bit. And there's, of course, the comedy around it, but we do spend some time talking about what's happening in today's day and age.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting balance to take with a show like this, because like you said, so many of the cases that come before Abby and even before Harry Stone were really focused on the absurdity. Mm-hmm. So when you were discussing including that episode, like what were some of the things that you wanted to focus on?
Well, we have Lucreta, who's our wonderful bailiff, and it's really through her eyes and talking about why she wanted to be a part of the judicial system. And it's a wonderful episode. I think our writers did a fantastic job with it. AZ Dungy was the credited writer on that and did an incredible job. And it really focuses on why Gergs, the role that Lucreta plays, wanted to be a part of the judicial system. And she has a beautiful monologue, without giving too much away, that speaks to that. And I think our writers did a really wonderful job with it, while also having a lot of fun throughout the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that Night Court is one of those shows that, again, is quite beloved. I'm very surprised that it wasn't a show that, came onto streaming, before it's coming back. Hopefully that Peacock will be bringing it back. But there are things about Night Court, as we were discussing, or I think other people have brought up before, that wouldn't necessarily fly today, particularly with Dan's character, with John Larroquette's character, Dan Fielding. He was very much like sex obsessed, and he was, flirting with Marky Post's character, Christine, all the time. And they would get in these situations. His character was very matured and changed. And I'm wondering, in terms of the discussions that were made in terms of bringing John's character Dan back, and in terms of what you wanted to bring to this new iteration, did that kind of come into play when you were talking about, like, here are the things, how do we maintain the balance, the formula of the classic Night Court, and still, make it fresh and new and, relevant to today and the way the atmosphere is in 2023?
I think first of all, there were definite conversations about how Dan Fielding exists today. And when you look at the character in the original, there were small evolutions, very small, but seeds that were planted about who this new Dan Fielding is. Mm-hmm. There's an episode, one of my favorites, and we even spoke about it in the pitch, the Dan Operation episode. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about, it's a beautiful, beautiful scene between him and Harry Anderson, who played him. And he talks about how he's been with all these women. And even though he's had all these experiences with women, no one has ever said, I love you. And that is truly what he wanted. And you see this, like, through all the womanizing and all the flirtations and everything that we saw Dan Fielding do. At the end of the day, he was this insecure guy who just really wanted love. And it really, what it did is, anytime you then saw him strike out with a woman or do something that, was inappropriate, mm-hmm. you maybe laughed a little harder because you saw where it was coming from. Mm-hmm. And then it was important to us that evolution really be strengthened as we were going into the series. And so he found love, he lost love, he's been humbled by life. And I think, as with hopefully with anyone over time, they would mature and grow. And that's truly who he is now. And he's not without his faults. He still thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he's still very much a narcissist. But I think that love and loss has just really shaped him.
Mm-hmm. Are people, as this new character is, like, now people are familiar with you as Abby Stone, do you have people coming up to you and kind of, or have you heard anything about, like, wow, she's so different from Bernadette? Because I think for so many years, people were so attached to Bernadette from Big Bang Theory, and a very different character. Same level of intelligence, I'd say, certainly the emotional intelligence. But do you have any kind of reaction with people saying, wow, for instance, that I didn't know that wasn't your voice, or things like that?
Yeah, I think there's been people who really did think I spoke that way, and which I honestly love it. The Big Bang fans have been just so wonderful over years, and they're a passionate group that I'm so grateful for. So yeah, I've been getting recently, oh, that's your voice. I didn't used to talk like that. And I do think part of me was like, oh, I should have like gradually introduced the voice on this show. Like as a mother, I should have known that I should have weaned everyone off of it. Like just maybe started the season like you're guilty, and then as the season went on, just made my voice lower and lower until I spoke in this register.
That would be kind of tough to write in, I'd say.
It would, yeah.
But here's one aspect about Abby I wanted to talk about, and it's the episode where she talks, where it's where it's brought up that she is a recovering alcoholic. Mm-hmm. What can you talk about your decision to make that part of the character, and what exactly does that mean in terms of how Abby will develop as we get further into the season?
Well, yeah, I think in talking about who we wanted Abby to be, I love the fact that she's this an eternal optimist, and that and I love that she's adopted her father's philosophy in the courtroom, that she judges people based on who they are, not their crimes. And she really wants to get to know them. So I loved all that groundwork that we laid for her in the pilot. And I thought Dan Rubin, our executive producer and showrunner, who was really one of the reasons why I agreed to play this role in the first place, because I loved his brilliant pilot script so much. And when we were talking about where we wanted Abby to go, I think it was important to all of us that she wasn't an optimist because she's naive or she hasn't experienced life in any way. I didn't want the optimism to come from this Pollyanna place of we can make the world better and I want to see the best in people. I think it's coming from a place of darkness. It's coming from a place of she's been through some stuff. And I almost cursed. I held myself back. She's been through it. Oh, good. Okay, that's good. She's been through it. She's in recovery. She's faced the dark roads of addiction. And she's learned that the alternative, the darkness, isn't for her. And so she's actively choosing the light on a daily basis, because she has no other choice. And I think I'm excited about the layer that adds to her, because I think it informs everything. When she's when someone is on the stand and she's trying to figure out like what's the best path for them, that's informing everything. That second chance on life is informing how she weighs in on every case, even though no one knows that. And then there's also the part that she lost so much time. When you talk about addiction and what that does, they often say that whatever time your addiction started, you sort of can freeze at that age until you get in recovery, and you lose that chunk of time. And then when you add to that the grief of losing her father, and she knows that this span of time with him was lost, and she doesn't get a chance now to make that up. So that's a part of her coming back to night court is to connect with him and to make him proud, as she says in that monologue that he had faith in her, that she didn't have in herself, and he was holding it for her until she had it again. And this is a tribute to that. And I think it really, when she speaks about her father with such reverence, I think it's because of that belief that he had in her.
It seems to me with this character, it's a great gateway into understanding her empathy too. Just in terms of that idea, like you were talking about, the optimism, but also the understanding.
Exactly. I think you sometimes have to have been through darkness to understand darkness. And so when these people are coming before her, it's not just talk of her saying, I want to give them a second chance and I want to figure out what's underneath all this, because I think she's often been judged by the surface and seeing like, oh, okay, she's this, young girl with big hopes and dreams. But there's more to her than that. And I think she wants to make sure that everyone who comes before her is given that same opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're coming to the end of our conversation, which makes me sad because we're having a great
I
time.
know, I want to talk to you more. These are such great times.
But one of the things I just wanted I want to circle back to the memories that you had watching Night Court, the original Night Court. And I think there's something very special about watching a show when we're young. And I say this with experience, just we may not remember some of the details of it, but we remember the feeling of a lot of it. And of course, sitcoms when we watch when we're young, I find teach us about comedy. So I'm wondering, and you had, you had a stand-up career before you came into television. What would you say that Night Court and shows like this may have taught you about comedy and the art of comedy?
Oh, see, I think it really was about how it made me feel. And I was a kid who really felt other than a lot growing up. And comedy felt, and these shows, it felt like friendship. It felt like, oh, these are, there was a connection there, and it's in your living room. And in my case, it was in my childhood bedroom. There is a part that, like, even though I was watching it and there was a screen in between us, I felt welcome there. And there was sort of a self-acceptance within that, because everyone on Night Court was sort of a bit left to center. And that's sort of, how I felt of it. And it was, so I felt there was just something very inviting about that. And I think also these shows really laid the groundwork for how I feel about comedy, in the sense that, and as I mentioned before, the laughter, I love that that's front and center, but I love the ability to flip that comedy mask, which of course on the other side is tragedy, and the fact that we get to feel a bit before we flip that mask again to the laughter. And that, to me, I remember watching those moments, the Michael J. Fox episode of Night Court in the first season, which I remember when it was in reruns, because I wasn't old enough when it aired the first time to see it, but I would catch that when in syndication. I remember seeing when it was going to come up in TV Guide and recording it on a VHS tape, because I loved it so much and I wanted to study it. Also because I loved Michael J. Fox as Alex P. Keaton, and my mind was blown that he was going to be on Night Court too. But I remember watching that scene. It's a beautiful scene between Harry Anderson and Michael J. Fox. I just remember there's this beautiful hug between them. Michael J. Fox plays this teenage runaway. And I think it was this lesson of, oh, like, if I'm feeling something and then there's just a joke that slipped in there, that if comedy is, a lot of it is surprise, and it's I think comedy lives in the unexpected. So if you're having this moment of heart and then all of a sudden you're surprised with a comedy, that laugh is going to be so much bigger and feel, I think, so good coming out of that, that moment of heart. And it's what we're hoping to do, and what Dan Rubin, I think the writers have done such a beautiful job with this season, and hopefully we'll get to do it more.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was great to chat with you. And I hope people watch Night Court Tuesdays on NBC.
Thank you. So wonderful talking with you.